The Galactic Council declared war on humanity, then she whispered, "You have no idea what you've started." Part 1, The Verdict. The alert came through while I was eating flatbread in the mess hall of Kessler 7, a frontier outpost sitting at the edge of mapped space like a forgotten thought. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the only days the kitchen made flatbread, and I had been looking forward to it since Saturday. The klaxon did not build slowly. It hit all at once, every screen, every speaker, every personal comm device on the station lighting up in a single second. I set down my flatbread. The voice that came through was not a voice I had ever heard before. It was synthesized, perfectly neutral, and spoke in galactic standard with the kind of precision that only comes from something that has never once second-guessed itself. By unanimous decree of the Galactic Council, the species designated Homo sapiens, common name, humanity, is hereby classified as an omega threat to interstellar stability. Effective immediately, a state of total war is declared against all human territories, vessels, and installations. The species will be contained. Resistance will be answered with proportional escalation until compliance is achieved. This decree carries the full authority of 63 member civilizations. You have 30 standard cycles to begin the process of unconditional surrender. The mess hall went completely silent. I counted 7 seconds before someone dropped a tray. Then everyone started talking at once, chairs scraping back, people pulling up screens, junior officers looking at senior officers the way children look at adults when they want someone to say it is going to be fine. My communications officer, a young man named Oliver Grant, stood across the table from me with his mouth slightly open and the color entirely gone from his face. He was 22 years old and had been stationed on Kessler 7 for exactly 4 months. "Commander Mirza," he said. "What do we do?" I picked up my flatbread and took another bite. Not because I was not thinking. I was thinking extremely fast. But I had learned a long time ago that the most important thing a leader can do in the first 10 seconds of a crisis is refuse to look panicked, because panic is contagious and calm is contagious, and I had 73 people on this station who were all watching me right now whether they knew it or not. I chewed. I swallowed. I set the flatbread down. "Oliver," I said, "get me a full station diagnostic and patch me into Fleet Command. Everyone else, finish your meals and get to your stations in an orderly fashion. We are not running." People moved. They were scared, but they moved, because that is what people do when someone tells them clearly what to do with confidence. It is one of the stranger and more reliable things about human beings. I walked to the command deck. The broadcast was still playing on a loop on the main screen, the Council's decree, cycling through every major human language. I watched it for a moment. 63 civilizations. 30 cycles. Omega threat. I pulled up everything we had on the Galactic Council's military doctrine. It was not a lot. The Council had never needed a military doctrine the way humans understood one, because in 4,000 years of recorded interstellar history, no species had ever told them no and meant it. They had enforcers. They had peacekeepers. They had fleets designed to overwhelm, to intimidate, to arrive and make resistance feel pointless. What they did not have, what they had never needed, was a doctrine for fighting something that did not know it was supposed to give up. I sat in the command chair and started pulling numbers. Kessler 7 had 4 ships docked. The Meridian, the Canton Bridge, the Opal Shore, and my flagship, the Endurance. Combined firepower, they were not impressive by any serious measure. Against a Council enforcement fleet, we were 4 against many. The math was not good. But math is not always the whole story. Lieutenant Commander Diane Ford came to stand beside me. Diane was 10 years older than me, had served on 3 frontier stations, and had the kind of face that looked permanently like she was doing arithmetic in her head, which was usually because she was. "They listed 63 member civilizations," she said quietly. "That is the whole Council. Every species voted." "I noticed," I said. "That means this was not a fast decision. They planned this." "I know. Which means they have assets already in position." "Almost certainly." She paused. "How are you this calm right now?" I looked at the broadcast still cycling on screen. The Council spokesperson, a tall, gray-skinned counselor named Vrethax, who I had seen in diplomatic feeds before, was speaking with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once considered that the situation might not go as expected. "Because they made their first mistake about 6 minutes ago," I said. Diane looked at me. "What mistake?" "They announced it." She blinked. They are required to announce a declaration of war under interstellar law. I know. And now so do we. They told us exactly what they are doing, what their timeline is, and what they want from us. I pulled up a secured channel on the console beside me. They think that announcement is a weapon. They think the sound of 63 civilizations speaking at once will make us freeze. I typed in an encryption key. They have never dealt with a species that planned for this. Planned for, Diane stopped, HFY protocol. I pressed send on the message I had composed. It was addressed to 6 specific fleet commanders across the frontier, and to a single office on Earth that I will not name here. The subject line was 4 words long. Begin protocol HFY. Now. We have been running worst-day simulations for 40 years, I said. Every war college, every tactical think tank, every quiet room where generals sit and ask themselves the question they are afraid to ask out loud: what do we do if the whole galaxy comes for us at once? We have been answering that question for 4 decades. Oliver's voice came from his station. Commander, I have fleet command on the channel. Earth Parliament is already discussing surrender terms. I almost smiled. Patch me in, but do not let them see my feed yet. I want to listen first. The Parliament channel opened. I could hear the voices, measured, frightened, trying to sound reasonable. Words like proportional response and diplomatic options and civilian protection. All reasonable words. All the right instincts for people sitting safely in buildings on a planet that had not yet been touched. The frontier was different. On the frontier, you learned something that people in safe buildings sometimes forgot, that some situations do not respond to reasonableness. Some situations only respond to the thing waiting on the other side of reasonableness. Oliver, I said, not looking up from my console. When Parliament finishes speaking, send them a courtesy message. Tell them Kessler 7 is operational and responding to the situation. Yes, Commander. Do I tell them how we are responding? I finally looked up at the main screen. Vrethax's face was still cycling through the broadcast, perfectly certain, perfectly confident. No, I said. Let it be a surprise. 3 decks below me, in the surveillance room that monitored all outgoing communications from Kessler 7, a council intelligence operative named Sinvala, embedded on our station for 8 months under the cover of a trade observer, was watching me on a small screen and composing a report to send back to Velketh, the council's administrative homeworld. The report was 1 paragraph long. She had filed hundreds of reports in her career, and she had a gift for reading the room. The paragraph she wrote that day was flagged immediately when it arrived at council intelligence. Her supervisor read it 3 times. Then passed it up the chain. It said, the human commander on Kessler 7 received the declaration of war, sat quietly for 4 minutes, and then began giving orders with the energy of someone who has been waiting for this moment. She is not behaving like a being who has just been told she is going to lose. I do not know how to classify what she is behaving like. Recommend immediate reassessment of anticipated human response patterns. I did not know about that report for a long time. But later, when I did read it, I thought Sinvala was remarkably perceptive. Because she was right. I had been waiting for this moment. Not because I wanted a war. Nobody who has ever stood on a frontier station, thin atmosphere between them and the void, wants a war. It is a cold and lonely and exhausting thing, and it does not build anything by itself. But I had read the council's internal position papers, the ones that leaked through back channels over the years, and I had understood something that my superiors in Parliament had not wanted to believe: the council did not intend to negotiate. The population caps treaty, the expansion limits, the resource access agreements, they were never designed to be fair. They were designed to be impossible. They were designed to give the council a reason. They had been looking for an excuse for a long time. And now they had given us one too. I stood up from the command chair, straightened my uniform jacket, and walked to the wide viewport at the front of the command deck. The stars outside were exactly as they always were, cold, distant, indifferent. They did not care about declarations. They did not care about councils or fleets or the pride of 63 civilizations. They were just there. And so were we. 63 civilizations, I said to nobody in particular. Diane heard me anyway. Yes, she said. I wonder, I said, if any of them stopped to ask whether we had been counting them too. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, had we? I turned from the viewport. There was work to do. 4 years, I said. Part 2, what we are. The first strike came on a Friday. Not that the day of the week mattered to the council. They do not observe human calendars, do not have a concept of weekends or the particular small exhaustion that builds through a working week and earns a person 2 days of rest. But it mattered to me, because I had grown up in a world where Fridays meant something, the end of effort, the beginning of a small freedom, and there was something almost personally offensive about the council choosing a Friday to end the world we knew. They hit 3 outer colonies simultaneously: Delphi Station, Margraves Rock, and the settlement on Kepler's Ridge. I watched the telemetry come through in real time on the command deck of Kessler 7, 3 clusters of light going dark on the tactical map in the space of 11 minutes, and I did not say anything for a long while. The colonies were not military installations. They were small, agricultural, mostly, a few thousand people each growing food for the frontier outposts and doing the slow patient work of making a hostile planet livable. The council's ships did not destroy the habitats. They were precise. They knocked out power, communications, and propulsion, disabled, not decimated, and then parked in orbit and waited. It was a message. This is what we can do. Imagine if we chose to be less restrained. Lieutenant Commander Diane Ford stood behind my left shoulder and said nothing. Oliver Grant at communications was very still. The rest of the command deck was the same kind of quiet that falls over a room when everyone is thinking hard and none of the thoughts feel safe to say out loud. They could have, Diane said finally. Yes, I said. They chose not to. Yes. She understood what I understood. The council wanted surrender, not rubble. Rubble cannot sign a treaty. Rubble cannot be a cautionary example held up to the next species that grew a little too fast and asked for a little too much. They needed us afraid and compliant, not simply gone. That was their second mistake. The first had been announcing the war. The second was assuming that what humans feel when they see 3 colonies go dark is the kind of fear that makes them small. It is not. I am not going to pretend that what I felt watching that telemetry was simple or clean. It was not. It was complicated and it was heavy, and there was a very specific kind of pain in knowing that thousands of ordinary people had just had their ordinary Friday interrupted in the worst possible way. People who had been doing laundry or eating lunch or watching their children run between the habitat rows. People with no say in any of this, who woke up that morning with no reason to think the galaxy had chosen today to remind them how small they were. But underneath that, alongside it, not replacing it, was something else. Something that I have no good polite word for. A kind of sharpening. A narrowing of focus so complete that everything peripheral just dropped away and what remained was pure, cold, and absolutely clear. The council had made their move. Now we made ours. Oliver, I said. Open an encrypted channel to Fleet Commanders Nora Walsh, Ben Calloway, Dan Lester, and Petra Vance. Authentication Delta 7. Tell them the window opened 12 minutes ago. Yes, Commander. They would know what that meant. We had not spoken about it openly, but the Worst Day doctrine had been circulated among frontier commanders through a system of graduated access for a decade. If you were stationed far enough out, if you had served long enough, if you had read enough of the right classified position papers and asked enough of the right quiet questions, you eventually got access to a document that had no official title, only an index number, and which laid out in careful and methodical detail exactly what to do if the scenario we were currently living in ever came to pass. The first principle of the Worst Day doctrine was this: the frontier responds before the Parliament does. Not because the Parliament is wrong, but because the Parliament is far away and the frontier is right here, and the opening moments of any conflict are the ones that define everything that follows. The second principle was, do not fight the enemy's war. Fight your own. The Council's war was one of mass and firepower. Their enforcement fleets were enormous, heavily armed, and designed to project dominance across vast distances. They were built to make a single overwhelming point and then wait for the other side to accept it. Our war was something entirely different. The Worst Day doctrine was built on a truth that Earth's military planners had arrived at through 40 years of the most uncomfortable kind of honest thinking: we will never outgun the galaxy. We are one species on a handful of worlds with a few centuries of spaceflight behind us. In a straight contest of mass and firepower, we lose. The numbers are not close. But a straight contest of mass and firepower is only one kind of war. There are other kinds. The model we had built was not drawn from our experience in space. It was drawn from something much older, from every account of every conflict in human history where the smaller side had refused to die on schedule. From forest fighters who knew their terrain. From sailors who understood their waters. From the long record of people who had been told the situation was hopeless and had decided, with full information, to disagree. The specific name of the doctrine, HFY, was Oliver's contribution, actually, offered during a simulation exercise 2 years ago when he was an even younger junior officer attached to a war college review. HFY is the chess piece that moves in the shape of an L, that jumps over everything between itself and its destination, that cannot be blocked by anything placed directly in front of it. He had said it in passing, almost apologetically, as if he expected to be dismissed. I had written it down. The first move of HFY protocol was geographic. The 4 ships of Kessler 7 did not hold position and did not retreat toward Earth. We split. The meridian took a route curving out toward the high dark between systems. The Canton Bridge and the Opal Shore went in 2 different directions at angles that no standard pursuit algorithm would flag as a coordinated movement. The Endurance, my ship, folded into a debris belt 300,000 kilometers from Kessler 7 itself and went almost entirely dark. To the Council's sensors, 4 ships became static and then became nothing. Not destroyed. Just gone. That alone generated 17 minutes of internal Council communication that our signals intelligence picked up and decoded in fragments. I will summarize the relevant part. They did not know where we were, and they were not accustomed to not knowing where things were. We had 2 days before the Council's patrol fleet reached the Kessler region. In those 2 days, I slept 4 hours, drank more coffee than was reasonable, and ran the same tactical problem from 11 different angles. The patrol fleet was 7 ships. Medium-class enforcement vessels, the Council's standard frontier tool, heavy enough to handle any conventional resistance and fast enough to chase anything that ran. We were not going to run. And we were not going to be conventional. Diane came to find me in the map room on the second day, where I was sitting with a cold cup of coffee and a tactical display that I had been staring at for 2 hours. I know that look, she said. Which look? The one where you have already decided what we are doing and you are just checking the math one more time. I said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The gravitational slingshot, she said. It was not a question. The debris belt we were hiding in sat at the edge of a useful gravitational relationship between Kessler 7 star and a dense, dark companion object that most navigational charts listed as navigationally hazardous and worth avoiding. It was worth avoiding if you were trying to hold a steady course. It was extremely useful if you were trying to generate a sudden, unpredictable velocity change without using your main engines, because engine signatures show up on sensors, but the pull of gravity is invisible right up until its effect is not. The Council's fleet doctrine had been developed by species who used gravitational bodies as obstacles, not as tools. Their positioning algorithms avoided complex gravitational environments. Which meant that when they entered the Kessler region looking for us, they would approach from a direction that made sense given normal tactical logic, and that direction happened to bring them through a corridor where the physics were going to be very unkind to them if someone knew exactly how to use it. We knew exactly how to use it. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Council's patrol fleet appeared on our sensors exactly where I expected it. 7 ships, moving in formation, running detailed scans of the region. Looking for 4 ships that had vanished. They were very good at what they were trained to do. They were not trained for this. The Endurance came out of the debris belt at a vector that no pursuing ship would have predicted because it was not a vector any powered vessel would normally use. We were riding the slingshot, using the companion object's gravity to add velocity that our engines had not produced and therefore our engine signature had not broadcast. We crossed the distance between ourselves and the leading Council vessel in 40 seconds. Their point defense had 3 seconds to respond. 3 seconds is not enough. The strike was surgical. Their propulsion. Their communications array. Their weapons systems. We were not trying to destroy them, and we did not. A disabled ship is more useful to us than rubble, because a disabled ship sends a message that rubble cannot. A disabled ship says, "We were right behind you, and you never heard us coming, and we chose to stop here." The remaining 6 Council ships broke formation, which is exactly the thing you should not do, but is exactly what any crew will do when they watch their lead vessel go dark in 40 seconds with no warning, and in the broken formation, the Meridian and the Canton Bridge appeared from 2 separate directions that the Council's response protocols had not accounted for. It was over in 11 minutes. No Council crew member was seriously hurt. All 6 remaining ships were disabled and left in stable orbits. I recorded a brief message for the Council's fleet command and attached it to a signal buoy set to broadcast on a loop from the engagement site. The message was simple. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I spoke in the same calm register I had used in the mess hall when I told my crew not to run. I said, This is Commander Aisha Mirza of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet, speaking from the Kessler engagement site. 7 ships came looking for 4. You will find your 7 ships exactly where we left them, undamaged and crewed by people who are unharmed. We are not where you are looking. We will continue to not be where you are looking. If the Council wishes to discuss this further, we are available for the conversation. We are not available for surrender. There is a difference. I paused, and then added one more thing, because I thought it was important. Your crews are well. Please let their families know. I cut the signal. Oliver was looking at me from his station with an expression I could not quite read. He had been running on almost no sleep and a great deal of adrenaline for 3 days, and I thought the expression might be a kind of odd exhaustion. Commander, he said. That last part. About their families. Yes. Will they understand why you said that? I thought about it. About Vrethax and his 63 civilizations, and about the fact that in 4,000 years of managing the galaxy, the Council had probably never once thought to send that message to the other side. Probably not yet, I said. But they will file it somewhere. And someday they will remember it. We were moving again before the day was out, different direction, different corridor, a completely new part of the frontier where the Council would have to start their search from scratch. We had no base. We had no fixed position. We were water moving around a stone. 2 days later, Oliver patched through a signal he had picked up from Earth. It was not an official broadcast. It was coming from somewhere underground, a civilian channel, low power, the kind of frequency that slips through gaps. It was a song. I do not know who started it or how it spread, but millions of people on Earth were humming the same melody at the same time, a human sound moving through the air of a planet that was refusing to be quiet. No words. Just the melody, persistent and calm, like water. I listened to it for a long time. Diane came to stand beside me again. She listened too. They know, she said. Not a question. They know, I agreed. Outside the viewport, the stars continued to be exactly what they had always been. We continued to be exactly what we had always been. And somewhere on Velketh, in a large and formal chamber, 63 civilizations were beginning, slowly, with considerable resistance, to realize that the 30-cycle countdown they had issued with such confidence was not going to produce the outcome they had planned for. We were just getting started. Part 3, She Who Whispers. 6 months into the war, the Council stopped calling it a containment operation. I know this because Sinvala, the Council intelligence operative who had been watching me from the surveillance room on Kessler 7 on the first day, eventually defected. Not immediately, and not easily, and for reasons I will get to. But when she did, she brought records with her, and among those records was a transcript of the internal Council session where the language officially changed. The phrase they used was, an active and unresolved conflict with an adaptive adversary. What they meant was, we cannot find them, and when we do find them, we cannot catch them, and when we do catch them, it does not go the way it is supposed to go. 6 months of this had taught the Council several things about human beings that they had not known before, or had known in the abstract and not taken seriously enough. The first thing was that we were genuinely comfortable operating without a fixed base. Every species in the Council maintained at least one homeworld, one core territory, one place that was the heart of the civilization and which had to be defended no matter what. That centralized heart was how the Council's military doctrine worked: find the heart, threaten the heart, watch the other side protect the heart, and in protecting it, expose themselves. We did not do this. Earth was real. Earth mattered. It was home in the deepest possible sense, and if the Council had been paying attention to what humans actually said and wrote and sang in those months, they would have heard just how much it mattered. But Earth was not our weakness. Earth was our origin. Our fleet did not coil around Earth to protect it. It spread outward, into every dark corridor and debris field and gravitational fold in the frontier, because the only way to protect the thing you love most is sometimes to draw the danger as far away from it as possible. The Council's planners kept waiting for us to make the move they would have made: fall back, consolidate, defend the core. We did not make that move. We made different moves, unexpected moves, moves that their models kept failing to predict because their models were built on the assumption that we thought the way they did. We did not think the way they did. My name had acquired a second version by this point. Among the Council's military command, I was listed in official documents as Commander Aisha Mirza, Terran Expeditionary, Omega Threat Designation. But in the field, among the crews of the enforcement fleets who had spent 6 months being surprised by things that came from directions they had not anticipated, I was called something else. Nakveth. It does not translate precisely into English. The closest version is something like the Whisperer, but that misses the specific texture of the word in Galactic Standard. It carries the implication of someone who speaks before you know they are there, who is already behind you before they have said anything. It was not a flattering name from the Council's perspective. But I will admit, in the privacy of this account, that I did not mind it. The name arrived indirectly, through a captured Council communications fragment that Oliver decoded with the kind of intense focus he brought to everything. He presented it to me with a careful expression, the way you show someone something you are not sure how they will receive. "They have a name for you," he said, and told me what it meant. I thought about it for a moment. "Is it accurate?" I asked. "I think so," he said. "Then I will take it," I said, and went back to the tactical problem I had been working on. This was around the time that the Council's internal dynamics began to fracture in ways that their external face tried hard to conceal. The 63 civilizations had voted unanimously for the war declaration, but unanimous votes are sometimes less unanimous than they appear. Some species had voted yes because they genuinely feared human expansion. Some had voted yes because voting no would have put them in a difficult position with the majority. And a small number, 3 civilizations, for if you count the one that was deeply split, had voted yes while privately believing the whole situation was being managed poorly and would end badly. That last group had begun, quietly, to keep notes. Sinvala was part of this process, which is why her eventual defection was not as simple as fear or sympathy, though both played a role. She was a careful thinker who had spent 8 months watching human beings at close range, and she had arrived at conclusions that were increasingly difficult to reconcile with the Council's official position on what humans were and what they were doing. I met her in person for the first time on day 163 of the war, in a neutral junction point that neither side officially claimed. She arrived alone, without weapons, and with a data package that took our intelligence team 6 hours to fully process. She was gray-skinned and tall and had the slightly formal bearing of someone from a culture where showing emotion publicly is considered a form of vulnerability. But her eyes were direct and steady, and I had long ago learned to trust steady eyes over performed confidence. We spoke for 2 hours. I will not record everything from that conversation. Some of it is not mine to share and some of it matters less than what she said at the end, when she was preparing to leave and we were standing at the exit of the small room where we had met. She said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to tell me the truth." "I will try," I said. "Are you afraid?" I looked at her for a moment. It was a genuine question. She had spent the entire conversation analyzing everything, my tone, my answers, the way I paused before certain words, and this was the thing she still could not resolve. "Yes," I said. "Every day." She was quiet. "Then, you do not show it." "No," I said. "But that is not the same thing as not feeling it." She left. She filed her defection papers with our fleet 3 days later. But what I have always remembered about that conversation is not the intelligence she brought, valuable as it was. It is the question itself. Because Sinvala had been watching humans for months, had watched us fight and improvise and refused to stop, and the thing she could not understand was whether we were genuinely unafraid or whether we were pretending. The answer was neither. We were afraid and doing it anyway. And to a species that had spent 4,000 years in a civilization structured around predictable, rational responses to clear incentives, that specific combination, fear plus forward motion, was the most incomprehensible thing we did. The Council had categories for bravery. They had categories for recklessness. They did not have a category for someone who knows exactly how dangerous the situation is, has calculated the odds, and responds by becoming more focused rather than less. I thought about this a great deal during those months, because it was not only about me. It was about Oliver, who had spent an interrogation, I will come to this, teaching his captors card tricks. It was about Diane, who maintained her precise mathematical thinking in situations that would dissolve most people's ability to add 2 numbers together. It was about every crew member on every frontier ship who had signed on knowing the assignment was hard and who kept turning up. The interrogation happened in month 5, 1 month before I met Sinvala. The Council captured Oliver during an intelligence exchange that went wrong. It was a clean capture, no violence, no damaged ships, simply Oliver in the wrong place when a Council patrol arrived with better timing than we expected. By the time I knew about it, he was already on a Council vessel and being transported to a processing station. I want to be honest about what that felt like. Oliver was not just a crew member. He was 22 years old and had named the doctrine that we were fighting the entire war with, almost by accident, in a simulation exercise where he had been half afraid to speak. He was earnest in the way that young people are earnest before the world has spent years sanding the enthusiasm off them. He made terrible jokes and kept getting better at them. I was not objective about his safety. Which is precisely why I made myself sit down, take 20 minutes, and think about it as coldly as I could. What did the council want from him? Intelligence, clearly, positions, plans, communications encryption. What would they do to get it? They would try the standard approaches. Reasonable conversation first, because the council prefers compliance to conflict. Then pressure. Then whatever their equivalent of persistence was. What would Oliver do? I thought about it for those 20 minutes. And then I thought about how the council would be thinking about it, what their models predicted a captured human junior officer would do, what the playbook said about extracting intelligence from an isolated and frightened young person with no backup and no immediate prospect of rescue. And then I started planning the rescue, because I was never going to just leave him there, and I knew roughly where the processing station was. What I did not know, and learned later from Oliver himself, was what actually happened in that interrogation room. Oliver taught them card tricks. Not immediately. He was scared at first, and he did not pretend otherwise. But once it became clear that the council's intelligence officers were going to spend a great deal of time asking him questions he either could not or would not answer, and that the process was going to take a while, he apparently decided that waiting in silence was worse than doing something with his hands. He had a standard deck of cards in his jacket pocket. He always had a deck. He had been learning sleight of hand for 2 years as a hobby, the way people pick up small skills because they like the feeling of getting better at something. He spread the deck on the table. He showed his interrogators a trick. They were baffled. He showed them another one. By hour 3, according to the records Sinvala later brought us, the interrogation had effectively stopped and 3 council intelligence officers were watching a human junior officer make cards appear and disappear while explaining, patiently, the principle of misdirection. Which was, I have always thought, among the most perfect things that has ever happened. The rescue was not elegant. It was fast, unconventional, and made no tactical sense if you were trying to fight by a traditional plan, which is exactly why it worked. I used the Endurance and 2 smaller vessels in a pattern that the Council's station defense predicted would come from one direction, and then came from 2 other directions at the same time. The whole operation took 19 minutes. Oliver was back on the Endurance with a slightly dazed expression and a story he has told at every gathering ever since. The debriefing took 2 hours. At the end of it, when he had covered everything, the interrogation, what they asked, what he did and did not tell them, he looked at me and said, they were not bad. The interrogators. They were just doing their job. I nodded. Most people are just doing their job. Does that matter? He asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. It means we should not hate them, I said. It does not mean we should stop. He thought about that. Nodded slowly. Commander, he said. How did you know I would keep them busy long enough? I looked at him. I thought about 20 minutes of cold tactical thinking and the conclusion I had arrived at. Because, I said, you have never once walked into a difficult situation and given up. You just find something useful to do with your hands until the situation changes. He was quiet for a moment. I did not know you noticed that, he said. I notice everything, I said. That is my job. What I did not say, because some things are better left as actions rather than words, was that it had not been a tactical calculation at all. I had simply known Oliver well enough to know what he would do. And knowing your people, really knowing them, not as assets or resources but as specific human beings with specific qualities, is not a soft skill. It is the sharpest tool in any commander's hand. The council did not know that about us yet. They were beginning to suspect it. And that suspicion was beginning to change things. Part 4, The Weight of Us. The message came through on a Thursday morning, 14 minutes old by the time it reached me. 14 minutes is how long light takes to travel between Earth and our position at that moment. 14 minutes is not very long in most circumstances. It is long enough to drink a cup of coffee, to read a short report, to walk the length of the Endurance twice. 14 minutes is exactly the amount of time I had to not know what the message was going to tell me. The Council had struck Earth. I knew it before the message finished decoding because the signal pattern was the kind our intelligence systems used only for Category 1 events, and the only Category 1 event we had not yet faced was Earth itself becoming a target. I sat in the command chair and I watched the decoding bar move across the screen, and I thought about my mother, who lived in a city on the coast of England, who called me every 2 weeks on whatever channel was currently available, who grew tomatoes on her balcony and sent me photographs of them with captions that were always funnier than they needed to be. I thought about whether the city was still there. The message finished decoding. The council had not struck civilians. They had struck infrastructure: 3 major power relay stations, 2 interstellar communication hubs, the docking facilities above Earth's southern orbital zone. Precise, damaging, deliberately non-lethal. The same message they had sent in month 1 with the outer colonies, scaled up. This is what we can reach. This is what restraint looks like from our side. Imagine if we stopped being restrained. My mother's city was fine. I sat in the command chair for a long time after reading that. Longer than I needed to. Diane came in, read the message over my shoulder, and stepped back without saying anything. Oliver checked the transmission twice to make sure he had decoded it correctly. The rest of the command deck was very quiet. Then I stood up. "Get me Walsh, Calloway, Lester, and Vance," I said. "Encrypted channel, all 4 simultaneously. And get me Captain Helen Ford from the Argent and Commander Sam Okafor from the Narrow Sea." Diane looked at me carefully. "All 6. All 6, I said. The 6 Frontier Fleet commanders assembled on the channel within 40 minutes, their faces on 6 separate screens arranged across the communications wall. Nora Walsh, compact and careful, with the kind of stillness that meant she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Ben Calloway, older than all of us, who had been on the frontier longer than any of us and had a habit of cleaning his glasses at exactly the moments when things got most serious. Dan Lester and Petra Vance, who had served together on the Opal Shore before Vance took her own command and who communicated in the shorthand of people who have been in danger together. Helen Ford, who had been asleep when the summons came and had the slightly sharp look of someone running on 4 hours and pure professionalism. And Sam Okafor, who had been the one most openly skeptical of HFY protocol in the early briefings and who had spent the last 6 months being, by his own admission, wrong about that. I told them what I was thinking. The silence afterward was longer than I expected. Then Ben Calloway cleaned his glasses. "Aisha," he said, which was unusual. He almost never used first names on command calls. "What you are describing is not a tactical operation." "No," I said. "It is a message." "Yes. Sent at considerable risk, with limited tactical benefit if it fails." "If it fails," I said. Another silence. Then Nora Walsh said, "I have run the approach vectors 3 times since you started talking. It is possible. Not comfortable, but possible." "I did not say comfortable," I said. Petra Vance said, "Velketh, just the word. Letting it sit there." Velketh. The Council's administrative homeworld. The center of the most organized interstellar governing body in known space, protected by the assumption, 4,000 years old and never once tested, that nobody would be foolish enough or capable enough to reach it. It was not heavily defended in the military sense because it had never needed to be. It was defended by reputation, by distance, by the impossibility of the idea. The impossibility of the idea was not as solid as it used to be. "We are not attacking it," I said, for the 3rd time in the conversation, making sure every person on those 6 screens understood this exactly. "We are arriving at it. There is a difference, and the difference is the entire point. The plan I had been working on for 2 days, since before the Earth strike, if I am honest, since the moment 6 months ago when I had realized where this war was eventually going to have to go, was called HFY's Gambit, after the chess piece, after Oliver's offhand observation in a war college simulation. The night. The piece that cannot be blocked. The piece that moves in the shape of an L, that jumps over everything in its way, that arrives in places the opponent had not thought to defend because they had not thought the opponent could get there. The Council was good at blocking what it could see coming. It had no framework for what it could not see coming. Velketh was 11 days from our current position through a combination of dark corridors, gravitational shortcuts that the Council's navigational charts listed as unusable, and a sequence of micro-jumps that would look, to any monitoring system, like equipment misfires rather than intentional movement. The Endurance's navigation officer, a quiet, precise person named Kate Hollis who had spent 3 years before the war charting exactly the kind of routes the Council considered impassable, had designed the route. She had been designing it, in her off hours, for 4 months. When I asked her why she had started without being told to, she looked at me with an expression that suggested the answer was obvious. "Someone was going to need to go there eventually," she said. "I thought it should be us." I love Kate Hollis. The 6 commanders agreed in the end, which was not a surprise. They were frontier people. They had come to the same conclusions I had, independently, over 6 months of a war that was going better than it should and still not ending. The council would not negotiate from a position of comfort. We had made them uncomfortable, but we had not yet changed the shape of the conversation. To change the shape of the conversation, you had to change what the other side thought was possible. We departed in 2 groups, 3 days apart, from positions far enough from each other that the movements looked unrelated. 6 ships, 5 different approach corridors, 1 destination. The Endurance went first. Kate Hollis sat at the navigation console and guided us through routes that felt, sometimes, like threading a needle in the dark, and she did it with the calm concentration of someone who has prepared so thoroughly that the difficulty has become familiar. On the 4th day, Ben Calloway's ship, the Resolution, sent a brief communication that made everyone on the Endurance laugh, a sound that felt strange and good after the weeks of tension. He had discovered that one of the gravitational corridors Kate had charted passed through a region that the Council's astronomical surveys had classified as of no navigational interest. It was of considerable navigational interest. It was also, he noted in his message, extremely beautiful in a way that was hard to explain but that he was going to try to paint when the war was over. Ben Calloway painted landscapes. I did not know this until that message. It is one of the things you learn about people in long, hard situations, that they carry whole interior lives that the job does not show you. On the 7th day, I recorded a message. This was the part of the plan I had not told the other commanders about in detail, because I had wanted to be certain of it myself before I said it out loud. It was also the part that I thought mattered most, more than the tactical surprise, more than the demonstration of reach, more than anything the ships themselves represented. I recorded the message in the small room adjacent to the command deck that served as my office, sitting at the desk with a fixed camera and no notes. I spoke in Galactic Standard, which I had learned over 3 years of frontier duty well enough to manage without a translator. I said, "This is Commander Aisha Mirza of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. I am transmitting this message on approach to Velkath and broadcasting it on every open channel that reaches your homeworld. I want to say 3 things, and I want to say them clearly. The first is this: we are coming. You will see us on your sensors within the next 48 hours. Do not be alarmed by the number of ships. There are not as many as you will imagine, because the sensors you use for deep space approach detection were not calibrated for the method we used to get here. The second is this: we are not attacking. I want to be exact about that word. We are not going to fire on your homeworld. We are not going to threaten your civilian population. We are not going to destroy anything. Not because we cannot, but because we choose not to. That choice is made freely, with full awareness of what you did to our outer colonies in month 1 and what you did to Earth's infrastructure 6 days ago. We have made the choice anyway. I want you to sit with the meaning of that. The third thing is this: we are available to talk. We have been available to talk since the first day. What we are not available to do is disappear. You declared this war. We did not ask for it. But we are here now, and we are not leaving, and if the Council would like to discuss an ending that does not require anyone to be destroyed, we are ready to have that conversation. We will hold position outside Velkatha's defensive perimeter. We will not approach closer than 1 standard unit unless invited. The invitation is yours to make." I paused, and then added the one line I had not planned, that arrived fully formed as I was about to cut the recording. "We are not what you thought we were. But we are exactly what we said we were. Think about the difference." I sent the message. It would arrive at Velkath roughly 19 hours before we did. The final 2 days of travel were quiet in the way that the time before large things tends to be quiet. Kate Hollis ran final navigation checks. Oliver monitored communications. Diane walked through the ship twice a day in the way she always did. The way that I had come to understand was not just routine inspection but also the physical version of knowing your people. She came back from each walk with the small particular knowledge of who was anxious, who was steady, who needed a direct word and who needed to be left alone. On the 9th night, I could not sleep. I walked to the observation lounge at the front of the Endurance and sat in the dark looking at the stars. I thought about my mother's tomatoes. I thought about Oliver and his card tricks. I thought about Ben Calloway painting landscapes after the war, whenever after the war arrived. I thought about the 14 minutes I had spent not knowing whether my mother's city still existed. And I thought about the fact that somewhere on Velkath, in whatever room the council used for its private emergencies, 63 civilizations or their representatives were reading my message and confronting something they had not planned for and could not file neatly into any existing category. I was not gloating. I want to be clear about that. There is a version of this story where the person telling it is triumphant, where the arrival at Velketh is the moment of victory and the moral is simply that we were stronger than they thought. That is not what I felt. What I felt was heavy. The good kind of heavy, the weight of something that matters, the weight of something you carry carefully because it cannot be put down. We had not come to Velketh to win. We had come to change the question. Winning and losing were the council's framework, and we had been fighting in their framework for 6 months. This was the moment we stepped outside it. On the 10th morning, Velketh appeared on the long-range sensors. Kate Hollis called it out quietly, as she called out everything, with the precise calm of someone doing their job exactly as it needs to be done. There it is, she said. I looked at the display. A small bright point, growing slowly larger as we moved toward it. Yes, I said. There it is. And for the first time in 6 months, I thought we might actually get through this. Not because we had won. Because we had arrived. Part 5, What We've Started. Vrethax was shorter than I expected. This is a strange thing to notice about the person who declared war on your entire species, but it was the first thought I had when I saw him in person for the first time in the Great Chamber of Velketh. I had seen him on screens for months, the broadcast, the council announcements, the intelligence footage, and screens have a way of making things look larger than they are. He was tall by the standards of some species and short by the standards of others, gray-skinned and angular, with the bearing of someone who had been important for so long that importance had become invisible to him, like the air he breathed. He looked at me for a very long time before he said anything. Around him, the chamber was enormous, built on a scale that I think was deliberately intended to make any individual standing in it feel small. The ceiling was somewhere above the level where details became visible. The walls were dark and smooth. The council members were arranged in a curved formation, each species given equal standing in the physical architecture of the room in a way that I appreciated. Even then, it meant the design of the chamber had been built around the idea that all members mattered equally, even if the practice had not always matched the principle. My 4 ships were visible through the chamber's viewports, sitting in formation outside Velketh's defensive perimeter exactly where I had said we would be. The council had sent out 3 representatives to meet us at the edge of the perimeter and escort us to the surface. It was not a gesture of trust, I was under no illusion about that. It was a gesture of controlled engagement, which was as much as I had asked for and exactly what I needed. I had brought Diane and Oliver with me. I had thought about bringing more, and decided against it. The size of the delegation I brought was itself a message. We do not need to fill the room to make our point. Vrethax finally said, "What are you?" The chamber was completely silent. 63 civilizations, or their representatives, waiting for my answer. Some of them I recognized from intelligence reports. Some were entirely unfamiliar, species from the far edges of the council's reach who had voted on the declaration and then watched the last 6 months with varying degrees of alarm. Some faces were unreadable to me, their emotional expression belonging to physiologies I had not spent enough time studying. But several were unmistakably the look of people who had not expected this day to arrive, who had believed the containment operation would resolve itself before it ever reached this moment. I thought about the question. Vrethax had asked it as if it were philosophical, and it was. But it was also literal. He had spent 6 months watching us do things that did not fit his models, and the question underneath the question was, what kind of entity are you? What rules govern you? If I knew what governed you, I would know how to deal with you. I thought about my mother's tomatoes and Oliver's card tricks and Kate Hollis quietly charting impossible routes for 4 months in case someone needed them. I thought about the song that millions of people on Earth had hummed through the first weeks of the war, the melody without words that said nothing and meant everything. I thought about 14 minutes of not knowing and the decision I had made in the dark of the observation lounge. I said, "We are the ones who came here to negotiate." Vrethax looked at me. I could not read his expression precisely, but I could read the stillness of it, the specific quality of someone who has received an answer that has landed somewhere they did not entirely expect. He said, "You came here with ships." "Yes," I said. "That is not how one typically opens a negotiation." "That depends," I said, "on the negotiation." "And on who you are negotiating with." I looked at the chamber around me, at the 63 species watching this exchange with the intensity of people who understand that something is happening that will be discussed for a long time after today. You declared war on us because you believed that arriving with force was the clearest way to make your meaning understood. We arrived with ships for the same reason. The difference is what we are asking for once we are in the room. The chamber was quiet. One of the council members, from a species I recognized as the Kelrath, who had been among the 3 civilizations Sinvala had identified as privately skeptical of the war from the beginning, shifted in their position and made a sound that my galactic standard was not quite good enough to interpret. Vrethax glanced at them briefly. You said, in your transmission, Vrethax said, carefully, that you are not available to disappear. Correct. And that you are available to talk. Also correct. And that you are not available to surrender. Correct. And I want to explain why, clearly, so there is no misunderstanding. I did not move from where I stood. I had chosen my position when I entered the chamber and I was keeping it, central enough to be visible to everyone, close enough to Vrethax that the conversation was direct, far enough from the escort that I was not leaning on their proximity. We are not available to surrender because surrender, in the terms your original declaration offered, does not preserve the things that are non-negotiable for our species. I have a list of those things, and I am prepared to share it, and none of them are things we invented in the last 6 months to use as a bargaining position. They are things we have needed for 100 years. Vrethax said, you are referring to the population caps treaty. I am referring to the fact that humanity has 11 billion people who need somewhere to be, I said. Not somewhere to conquer. Somewhere to live. The expansion that frightened this council was not imperial ambition. It was 11 billion people who need food and space and the ability to raise their children in conditions that do not involve waiting for the next crisis. The CAPS treaty made that impossible. We said so, through every diplomatic channel available to us, for 30 years. Nobody listened. Eventually we stopped asking and started building. Another silence. Longer this time. Diane was standing at my left shoulder, and I was aware of her stillness, the deliberate, chosen stillness of someone who is not going to move or speak because she understands that this moment belongs to the argument being made and not to any individual person making it. Oliver was at my right. He was, I think, still slightly amazed to be in the room. He had that quality of attention that very young people have when they're watching something they know they will remember for the rest of their lives, present in the exact way that older people sometimes forget to be. It was Council Member Velrath of the Kelrath who spoke next. They had not been expected to speak. I knew from Sinvala's intelligence that the Kelrath delegation had been told to observe and not engage during the initial session. Velrath, apparently, had decided this instruction was less important than the thing they wanted to say. Commander Mirza, Velrath said. Their galactic standard was very good, cleaner than Vrethax's, which surprised me. I have read your transmission several times. You said that you made the choice not to harm Velketh freely, with full awareness of what we did to your outer colonies and your homeworld's infrastructure. I want to ask, was that choice unanimous? Among your fleet commanders? I looked at Velrath. Yes, I said. There was no dissent. I considered the question carefully, because I wanted to answer it precisely. There was doubt, I said. There were people who asked whether the risk was worth taking. That is not dissent. That is intelligence. But the decision, once made, was carried by everyone. Velrath was quiet for a moment. Then, we have 63 member civilizations. We have disagreed about almost everything in this chamber over 4,000 years. The declaration of war against humanity was the only unanimous vote in the last 600 years. I know, I said. I am telling you this, Velrath said, because I think you should understand the weight of what you are asking. You are asking for a seat. Equal standing. The right to expand without artificial limits and the right to participate in the governance of the space you expand into. And you are asking this in a chamber that has not admitted a new member in 200 years, to a council that has not been unanimous about anything since the day it voted to go to war with you. I said, I know. That is why we are asking here and not from a position of surrender. It took 3 hours for the formal session to begin. In that time, I was escorted with Diane and Oliver to a small adjoining chamber where we were offered food and water and whatever Sinvala had described in her briefings as the council's equivalent of a restroom. I stood by the window and looked at Velketh's surface, green and brown in the particular amber color of its dominant vegetation, a world that had been the center of interstellar governance for 4,000 years and that had, in all that time, never had uninvited guests arrive at its door. Diane came to stand beside me. She had been quiet since we entered the chamber, which was normal for Diane. She stored language carefully and deployed it when it was most useful. She said, "You did not tell them about Sinvala." "No. You could have. It would have reinforced that we have sources inside the council structure. Yes, I said. And it would have destroyed whatever trust she has built in the last 6 months and made every council member in that room wonder what other intelligence we have and who gave it to us. I would rather they wonder about our ships than wonder about their people. Diane nodded slowly. Velrath surprised me, she said. Velrath surprised me too. They seem to want this to work. Enough of them do, I said. That is what I am counting on. Not unanimity. Not all 63. Enough. The formal session lasted 9 hours over 2 days. I will not transcribe all of it here. Some of it was procedural in a way that is important to the outcome and exhausting to read, and I am not interested in making this account into a document. What I am interested in is the shape of what happened, because the shape is where the meaning is. On the first day, the Council presented its position. Humanity would be offered a cessation of hostilities in exchange for an agreement to cap expansion at current limits for the next 50 cycles, after which the population question could be reviewed by a committee. No seat on the Council. No change to the treaty structure. Essentially, a pause dressed up as a peace. I thanked them for their clarity and said no. Several council members who had entered the room expecting a human commander to be grateful for any offer looked, for the first time, genuinely uncertain. I presented our position. A full seat on the Galactic Council, permanent, with voting rights equal to any current member. An immediate and permanent end to the population caps treaty and its replacement with a framework that would be negotiated collaboratively, with human participation, over a period of 5 cycles. And a formal acknowledgement, not a public declaration, just an acknowledgement in the record, that the original declaration of war had been issued based on incomplete understanding of the species it targeted. The third item caused more disruption than the first 2 combined. The idea of any council acknowledging error, formally, in the record, was apparently unprecedented. Velrath said, "You understand that this is not how the council operates." "I understand that it is not how the council has operated," I said. "I think how the council operates is going to change. We are at the beginning of that change right now, in this room. The acknowledgement does not need to be public. It does not need to be broadcast. It only needs to exist in the record, because in 200 years, when someone reads this history, I want the record to reflect what actually happened." Vrethak said, very quietly, "You are thinking about 200 years from now." "I am always thinking about 200 years from now," I said. "That is one of the things you did not account for when you declared war on us. We plan for the very long term. We have to. We have 11 billion people." The second day began with the vote on our membership application, which required a 2/3 majority of council members to pass. I sat in the observation area adjacent to the chamber and watched the vote unfold on a display that Oliver had configured to translate the council's voting protocol into something we could follow in real time. 4 civilizations voted to continue the war. No amount of anything was going to change those 4 votes, and I had known this going in. There were species in the council that found humanity genuinely threatening at a level that could not be addressed in a 9-hour session, and the correct response to that was not to dismiss the concern but to acknowledge it and commit to earning trust over time. I had said this in the session. I had meant it. 6 civilizations abstained. Also expected. Abstentions were their own form of communication. These were species that were not ready to vote yes but were also not willing to vote for continued war. 9 voted yes. The result was read out by the chamber's administrative voice in the same flat, synthesized tone that had announced the war declaration 6 months before on every screen on Kessler 7. I sat in the observation area and let the sound of it settle over me without reacting immediately, because reactions can mislead and I wanted to receive the information cleanly before I decided what to do with it. Humanity was now a member of the Galactic Council. The first species admitted under duress. The only species to have demanded it. I stood up. Walked back into the chamber. Stood where I had stood for 9 hours over 2 days. "Thank you," I said. "We will try to be worth it." Vrethax looked at me for a long moment. The look was different from the one at the beginning of the session. Something had shifted in it, not warmth, exactly, but a quality of genuine engagement. He had spent 2 days watching me argue, listening to me say no to things that should have been enough and yes to things that were unreasonable by any historical standard, and I think he had arrived at a place of reluctant respect, which is different from agreement but is at least honest. He said, "I have one question." Not a formal question. A personal one. "All right," I said. "When I spoke to you at the beginning of this session and asked what you were, you said you were the ones who came here to negotiate. I have been thinking about that answer for 2 days, he paused. What would you have done if we had refused to let you in the room? I looked at him. I thought about Kate Hollis charting impossible routes for 4 months. I thought about the song on the radio. I thought about 14 minutes. We would have found another room, I said. He considered this. Then he said, with the particular tone of someone filing something away carefully, you would never have stopped. No, I said. Not if we had refused the negotiation. No. Not if we had, he stopped, not in any scenario you ran. There was no scenario in which we stopped, I said. Not because we are reckless. Because we had people to keep alive. And because we were right. Both of those things together mean you keep going. The chamber was very quiet. Velrath, from their position across the room, said quietly, in a tone that was more to themselves than to anyone else, we did not understand that. No, I said. You didn't. That is what I whispered to Vrethax when he announced the war, in a manner of speaking. You had no idea what you were starting. Not because you were careless, but because there was no data point in your 4,000 years of history for a species that operates the way we do. And how, Vrethax said carefully, do you operate? I looked at the chamber. At 63 species, now 64, and the weight of 4,000 years of history around them, and the particular moment we were all standing in together. We operate, I said, like people who have already imagined the worst possible outcome, accepted it, and then decided to try anyway. We are not brave because we are not afraid. We are afraid constantly. We are brave because we have never once let the fear make the final decision. The return to the Endurance was quieter than I expected. Diane walked with me to the shuttle without speaking, which was comfortable. We were long past the point of needing to fill silence. Oliver was behind us, and I could hear him on his comm already beginning to draft the communication to Fleet Command that would tell them what had happened. We lifted off from Velketha's surface and I watched through the shuttle's small viewport as the planet fell away below us. The amber vegetation catching what light there was. The great chamber complex visible as a small dark geometry on the surface. 4,000 years, I thought. And then us. 3 weeks later, when we were back on Kessler 7 and the ceasefire was holding and the first preliminary meetings of the expanded council were being scheduled, I received a private message from Vrethax. No formal header, no council seal. Just a personal transmission, addressed to me specifically, sent through a channel that suggested he had gone slightly out of normal procedure to send it privately rather than officially. It said, our historians are working on the formal record of the last 7 months. They are encountering a difficulty. They cannot agree on the classification. Some argue this should be recorded as a war that humanity won. Others argue it should be recorded as a conflict that humanity ended before a decisive military resolution was reached. The distinction matters for the category in which the record is filed. I thought you might have a perspective. I read the message twice. Then I wrote back 3 words. Does it matter? I sent it and went to the mess hall, because it was Tuesday and the kitchen was making flatbread. I sat down. I picked it up. The stars outside the viewport were the same stars they had always been, cold and distant and indifferent to declarations and treaties and the particular gravity of moments that change things. They did not know or care that 64 species now shared a table that 63 had set without us. But I knew. And 11 billion people, going about their Tuesdays, knew in the way that people know things that have been removed from the air, a pressure that was there yesterday and is not there today, a fear that was the background frequency of everything and has now, not vanished, but changed its shape into something that can be carried rather than something that carries you. My comm buzzed. A message from my mother. She had sent a photograph of her tomatoes. The caption said, I heard it on the news. I always knew you would find a way. Also these ones came out very well, I think it is the new soil mix. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Red tomatoes on a balcony rail, with the city behind them and the sky beyond that and somewhere beyond the sky, if you kept going, the whole enormous arguing living universe of which we were now, officially, and on record and whether it liked it or not, a permanent part. I wrote back, they look perfect. Save me some when I get home. Then I ate my flatbread. Outside, the frontier waited, the same way it always had, full of things we had not mapped yet, full of space that was no one's and everyone's, full of the particular silence of distances that are not empty but only waiting. We had work to do. We had always had work to do. We were, after all, exactly what we had always been. And now everyone knew it.